I'm David Johnson.
And I'm Evan Schumann.
And we were tasked to going in the utility stand and removing invasive species using the hack and squirt and cut stump techniques.
So this project entailed two groups, one being David and I, and the second consisting of Matthew Finch and Nicholas Boyette, to go into the unplanted section of the utility stand located east of Moore Highway to go in and remove invasive species for future teaching purposes. As you can see in this photo right here, the area that we focused our efforts on is outlined in red.
So the whole purpose of this project was to go in the utility stand and remove the invasive species that was ultimately choking out native species that we can use for educational purposes. The educational purposes I mentioned would be an advanced educational advantage in fire ecology, dendrology, hydro-wetlands, and even herbaceous. We'd love to go in and create and clean out this stand and be able to plant pond pine, which is a more fire adaptive pine, which is what we're looking for to be able to run a hotter fire through this bottom and be able to keep it burned. The pond pine is actually adapted to fire, so it needs fire to open up the serotinous type cone and be able to disperse its seeds. The time frame of this project ended around September 27th. We completed most of our field work between the 13th and the 25th. Ultimately, we had 20 hours between Evan and myself and 20 hours between the other group, collectively combining to make 40 hours of field work for this task.
So these are some of the species that was told to us by our stakeholder, Dr. Vanessa Lane, that we need to go specifically target. The first one, which you see on the other side of the screen next to David, is the Chinese tallow. This is the species that we found the most prevalent and the most thickly invaded. The second most prevalent species that we found was the Chinese privet. There were certain sections that were very, very thick, and they had made a very, very, very heavily populated colony there. Camphor tree was another invasive species that we came about. We didn't see that many, but we did make sure to go ahead and eliminate them whenever we did see them. One of the specific species that Dr. Lane told us that we need to watch out for, and whenever we found it, we need to go ahead and remove it, was the Japanese climbing fern, which had not made a significant impact in the area, but if allowed to go on any longer, it could. The treatment that we used the most was the hack and squirt method of herbicide, and another method that we used a decent amount was the cut stump technique, but it was not utilized as much as the hack and squirt method. The cut stump technique was used for smaller trees of smaller diameters, and we would use a bow saw to cut it as close as we could to the ground to prevent any kind of tripping or any kind of popping a tire, anything of the sort. But we mainly used the hack and squirt technique because we came about a lot of larger trees that it would be really, really beneficial for. Using a hatchet and a bottle of herbicide mix, you would go up to the tree and make incisions around the tree, which I will then demonstrate in the next slide. As you can see in the picture opposite from me, using a downward motion of your hatchet, you would come down on the tree to peel back the bark and expose the cambium. You would then carefully use your herbicide mix and spray it into these wounds of the tree. Peeling back the bark, but then leaving it, would allow that bark to hold the herbicide against the tree, which would then eventually be distributed throughout the tree and kill it.
Some of the basic supplies we used were a hatchet, which is just it has a sharpened edge on one end and a blunt edge on the other. The bow saw is just a handled saw with widely notched teeth used for cutting wood. That's what we use for the cut stump technique. Squirt bottle is a relatively inexpensive piece of equipment to obtain. You can obtain it from any hardware store or Walmart. No training required. The garland, which is pictured here, we used a 50-50 mix of Garlon and water. We also used a container of marking dye, which was just used to mix into the concentrate that we were using on the trees to be able to directly be able to pinpoint exactly where we are applying the chemical, to be able to cut down on usage and overspray, because it turns the concentrate a very dark blue, and it's very visible on the ground or any kind of substance, and it's a very helpful thing to use. Here's some of the cost for the equipment. We were lucky that ABAC was able to provide most of this equipment for us, so it did not cost us personally. The sum for all the equipment come out to be around $242.42, which consisted of a hatchet, which for $35, which you can obtain at a local hardware store. Squirt bottle was around $4, which you can also obtain at any local hardware store or your neighborhood Walmart. The Garlon you see there, we have it listed as 2.5 gallons. We did not use 2.5 gallons, but most of the time that's what you get when you get it from a licensed herbicide dealer, and that's going to run you around $150 for 2.5 gallons. Also, we used a bow saw. You can get one of those for around $13.50, $15. You can also obtain that through any box store, hardware store, Walmart, Tractor Supply. The marking dye we got by the gallon, run you about $40. And so these were most of the basic equipments and processes that we used in our project.
So these are some of the safety equipment that we used, the personal protection. The biggest thing was wearing long pants and long sleeves. This was not only to prevent the herbicide spraying on us and getting on us and eventually leaking into our skin, but also to protect ourselves from all the cuts that we could have gotten from all the vines that had thorns on them, such as blackberry and rotundifolia, that we seem to encounter on a daily basis in the field. Another piece of equipment that we used was work boots. Definitely needed those. It was very thick. There were lots of thorns. Try to prevent cuts on our feet, cuts from the hatchet if it happened to slip. Something that happens. Would hate to see it happen, but always take precaution. Another reason that we would wear boots, it was down in a wetland area. There was a lot of mud, a lot of water, so wanted to keep our feet as dry as possible to keep ourselves going at 100%. We also use work gloves to try and prevent any cuts on our hands or any kind of herbicide leaking out of the bottle or spraying back onto our hands. Don't want it leaking through our skin. And another thing that we used was safety glasses. Don't want any herbicide spraying back and coming into our eyes, or any kind of debris hitting our eyes or getting into our eyes that could prevent us from working that day or prevent us from maybe even having to stop the whole project.
Here listed are a few problems we encountered. One was a very thick understory. In some places it was so thick we had to actually maneuver our way through. Like Evan stated, a lot of muscadine vine, a lot of vines, a lot of trees entangled in each other. They were both native and non-native species that were causing issues with us. We were only targeting non-native species, but the native also caused a problem as well. Also, we had a water stream running through our treatment zone. We had to take extra precautions to not contaminate the water system, either that be with the herbicide directly or slash being thrown into the creek. We did not we took precautions to maintain the quality of the water and the organisms that would inhabit it. Weather conditions posed a big threat to us. It was in the middle of the summer, very hot and humid conditions, a lot of afternoon showers, which prevented us from working a lot of days. The weather was very hot. We had to go slow, preventing us from covering quite as much ground as we'd like. We had to stop and take a few water breaks just from the sweat and everything. We wanted to stay safe and do everything as safe as we could. So we were sure not to dehydrate ourselves. The rain also caused problems. Obviously, you can't. It's hard to work in the rain, and also when the trees are wet, the herbicide seems to run down the tree a lot more, and being exposed to potentially native species if it made it to the ground. We had some equipment limitations as well. We had a lot of projects going on at the same time in a lot of different places. Spray bottles were hard to obtain at times, along with hatchets, but we found a way. Wildlife species also caused us a few problems. We ran into a lot of biting insects, whether that be ants, wasps, mosquitoes. We found a beehive. Also ran across a non-venomous species of snake. It was an oak snake. Luckily, we did not come across any venomous species of snakes, which was a good thing. But we got a lot of work done in the time we had, given the conditions we were working under.
So we did get to treat a very, very large portion of our targeted area. Now, that being said, we were not able to go in there and treat every single tree just because there was such a thick invasion. There was a lot of root suckering going on, a lot of stump sprouting going on. So it was very, very hard to see those little tiny trees. And also there were certain areas that we tried to stay clear of, such as the railroad tracks, to not kill any trees, which could eventually in the future pose a problem to trains coming through. This was right here pictured was the north section that we focused most of our efforts on. As you can see, it is very, very thickly populated by Chinese tallow. This is all Chinese tallow pictured, and every single one of these trees got treated. And in the bottom point, you can see the majority of the invasive species were Chinese tallow, but we did have to spend a lot of time removing some of the Chinese privet as well.
So here pictured are some of the results. This is a recent result from what we did just a few weeks ago. You can actually see the canopy deteriorating, losing its leaves, and as we know, it's still the end of summertime, but not quite time for the trees to start shedding its leaves. So this is an obvious result of our hack and squirt herbicide application. On the other side, we have some old stumps that a group came through prior to our task and did. You can clearly see the notches on the tree where they performed the hack and squirt technique as well. And you can also see a lot of the distortion beginning to happen in the bark, ultimately explaining that the tree is dead and that the technique is working.
So in these two pictures right here, these are not our doings, but these are the doings of students from a few months ago that used the same exact technique that we used. In the picture opposite for me, you can see the obvious slashes in the bark from using a hatchet, using the hack and squirt technique, and it has done its job. That tree is completely dead. There's a lot of discoloration going on. There's bark peeling off, which you can also see in this picture as well. It was done at the same exact time. It was done a few months prior to our work, but you can see the extreme discoloration in the tree and the bark is peeling off as well. It just goes to show the effectiveness that the hack and squirt technique can have on small areas that are thickly populated by invasive species. The hack and squirt technique may be a little bit labor intensive, but it is a lot more ecologically friendly than some of your more large scale removal techniques such as aerial spraying or using heavy equipment to come in and remove these native species. You could also harm native species at the same time.
So we just like to give a big thanks to our stakeholder, especially Dr. Vanessa Lane and the ABAC for providing us with the equipment to be able to gain such knowledge for educational purposes and experience that we'll be able to take with us throughout our career. So we just want to give a thanks to everybody that was involved for the opportunity and the equipment to be able to make this happen.
Thank y'all.